in Israel, of course. All right. See you on the other side. Dirty Moderates, Israel attacks, scratch that. Iran attacks Israel in a really history-making day this past weekend. So I didn't want to waste any time in bringing on a friend of the show, someone who joined us not long ago to talk about the crisis in Gaza, and now is here to help us illuminate this entire, I would say, kind of remaking of almost regional stability or instability and all that went with it. Anyway, Shaiel Ben-Ephraim is here. You all who listen to this podcast know him. Shaiel, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. So great to be here. Such a great, catchy tune. It always makes it so fun to join.
Well, all right. So those who don't know, Shaiel has worked in IDF intelligence and as a podcast on all things Israel. Tell us about the background of this attack. Let's start with that. I mean, we knew it was coming. We knew Israel took out one of the consulates in Damascus. But let's go through it back to basics. I think it sort of came out of nowhere for a lot of people. You and I follow this avidly. But let's go back to how did we get here?
Yeah, so there's been what people call a shadow war between Israel and Iran now. I don't even know when it started. I mean, since the 90s probably, and increasing with increasing intensity in the last few years. And what the center of the tension has been before October 7th was the transfer of weapons and the transfer of fighters through the Bekaa Valley from Syria into Lebanon, creating sort of a Shiite crescent of Iranian power leading all the way from Iran into Lebanon, turning Hezbollah into probably the strongest non-state military actor in recent history. Mm-hmm. And Israel has been doing what it can to interdict that development by bombing trucks, convoys, killing commanders. The United States has been involved in this effort as well, most famously when President Trump ordered the assassination of Soleimani, which in my opinion was the highlight of his presidency. Yeah, that was the one moment I supported Trump.
Well, wait. We talked about it. We're going to give him credit because we're seeing some of the benefit from the Abraham Accords right now, right? I mean, to a certain degree. I mean,
that's a very complicated discussion, and we can have it. Okay. I'm less sure about that. I'm definitely confident that the Soleimani...
neither of us can stand Donald Trump, but I think, again, the taking out of Soleimani and what was achieved regionally through that agreement, I think paves the way for a more or less a less volatile region. How about that?
Well, I would argue that by ignoring the Palestinians and the Abraham Accords, this played some part in October 7th.
Okay.
I think that it's very important to remember this for the future. So I'm not doing this to be pedantic and be annoying.
No.
I think it's very important to remember in the future that we can't bypass and ignore the Palestinians when we do regional diplomacy. Because if the Palestinians are ignored and bypassed, what we've learned from the past, whether we're talking about the first Intifada or what's happening now, is that they will make sure that you pay attention to them. Because for them, it's life or death. So if they're ignored by the international system, they will act. And that's not good for anyone.
Right.
But anyway, getting back to Iran. So Israel had an opportunity to kill basically everyone at the top of the chain of command of the IRGC, of the Iranian military Revolutionary Guard that's running this at the same time. Now, why were they so brazen as to gather at the same place at the same time? Because they were gathering at a compound in the Iranian consulate in Damascus, which according to the Vienna Treaty, you're not allowed to hit, even if the targets there are military. And the targets were military. I've seen some people say, oh, they were diplomats, they were politicians. No, they're military, they're legit targets. But the where they were hit is technically not a legitimate target. So they thought that Israel wouldn't do that. Israel did hit there. Now, the Iranians had a real embarrassment when Soleimani was killed, that they didn't respond as strongly as people expected them to, because Soleimani was a symbol. And they responded by, half-heartedly bombing some American bases. It was really quite pathetic in terms of what their supporters were expecting. And now some of their supporters were teasing them, oh, now we're going to see how they're not going to do anything about this either. So between the attack on Iranian sovereignty and between killing the person who was Soleimani's, who took over Soleimani's job, Iran was forced to react sharply. And here we had a serious failure of Israeli intelligence. Not the first time, unfortunately, probably not the last time. They expected the Iranian attack response to be muted. It was not. And one thing we've discovered about Israeli intelligence is they're very good at knowing what the enemy is doing factually, very bad at knowing what the enemy is planning. That's what's
interesting.
Yeah. They're psychological.
They know it when it's happening, but they don't know exactly when it's going to hit. Is that right?
Yes. So they have good sources. They don't understand the mentality of the enemy.
Israel, wait a second. I got to stop you there. This is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, your beloved half homeland, as we call it, because I know you're half American. But hold on. Israel doesn't know what the enemy's planning?
Israel doesn't understand how the enemy's mind works.
So
I think that's the thing. So the way intelligence works is you get a lot of information. There's a lot of noise. You hear different plans. You hear this plan, the other plan, this plan. So the fact that when they say they knew about 9/11 or they knew about October 7th, that's a bit of a misunderstanding of how intelligence works. You get all these different plans, and some of them are blowing smoke up your ass. Some of them are fake plans to throw you off. Some of them are real plans that don't come to fruition. Things change. So basically, you get a plan. You don't know if it's going to happen or not. What you need to do as an intelligence agency is try to figure out how your enemy thinks so you can have some idea of which plans they're actually going to follow. Israel seems to, I wouldn't have told you this before October 7th, but I think everyone can agree now who's analyzing this, Israel stinks at that. It stinks at that. It didn't know what they were going to do on October 7th. It didn't know how they were going to react now. And you can look all the way back to 1973. The main difficulty in 1973 wasn't that they didn't know what the Egyptian military was doing physically. It's that they didn't understand what the Egyptians were planning, and that the Egyptians would be willing to risk losing for the national honor. They don't understand the psychology. I think that just like Americans, Israelis have a tendency to think the enemy is a bit more rational than they are.
Right.
It's a problem Americans have. Americans think that if you throw money at problems and at countries, they'll become more peaceful. That doesn't work in the Middle East. And Israelis think that their enemies are more rational and less escalatory than they are. And this is a repetitive problem. You should always expect the worst when it comes to, bloodthirsty maniacs like Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran. And I think it's time that Israel understood that.
Well, let me say this as someone who really has taken a keen interest in most of my life in geopolitical affairs. When you talk about the Middle East, I think what makes me, besides being Jewish, what makes me a hawk, what makes me very pro-Israel, but the real world is not rational. Now, we have had, not for me to be pedantic, we had a rational Soviet Union and a rational China that we were able to do business with on the world stage for 50 years, okay, roughly. That containment, mutually assured destruction, I mean, there's a lot of nuance to this, but basically the Soviets were scumbags, but they were not going to blow everybody up. I have always said that I think that the difference and the dividing line in foreign policy, though of course there are Arab alliances, but especially with Hamas, going back to the PLO and the existence of Israel, is you don't have a battle that's simply geographic or strategic. It's civilizational. And a civilization, and I'm not calling for a holy war. They are. But I'm saying, seriously, I'm saying that I think there are so many people who actually believe on the streets right now who march for Gaza. I don't think everybody is a rip-roaring Jew hater. I think a lot of them are naive. I think there are tons of anti-Semites. Trust me, I think they're the worst people. I think they're supporting the worst cause around. However, they actually believe that if Israel did X, Y, Z, Z, P, O, L, M, N, O, P, that would be it. We'd have a two-state solution and life would go on. You obviously know that. You live and breathe this. I know that isn't true. And that's where I say I'm just shocked because, Iran, these guys are fucking crazy. and not rational. And who knows whether this attack, and that's what the next question was going to ask you, was this it was a limited attack, though it was thwarted, or is this just the beginning of their plans? And obviously Israel's going to retaliate. So let's talk about that. Like what's obviously, you mentioned Soleimani and the consulate, but obviously there's 45 years of hatred here since the fall of the Shah. So, anyway.
Yeah. So, I said that Israelis suck at understanding what the enemy wants, and I put myself in the category. I've analyzed some of the stuff. I've been more correct than Israeli intelligence on several things, but I'm not above those mistakes. So I can just guess, right? But this is how it appears. It appears that Iran made that attack in order to create a big media splash that would make it very clear that it's acting robustly, but without causing the kind of damage that would completely change the equation. So what Iran is trying to do is change the equation somewhat. They're changing the equation somewhat to, if you do certain things, we will react from Iran itself, something that they've avoided until now. They don't want to react too harshly, I believe, to Israel for one very simple reason. Israel has what we call escalation dominance over Iran, which is the fact that if the flames go higher at some point, and that point might not even be that high up, Israel can cause a lot more damage to Iran than Iran can cause damage to Israel. I think the fact that all these missiles were shot down is an indication of the fact, not that Iran can't harm Israel because it didn't shoot everything it had, but that Israel can harm Iran a lot more. Iran doesn't have those self-defense systems that Israel has, not at that level.
No.
And Israel can hit them. So it knows that if it escalates too much, Israel will hit it. On the other hand, Israel doesn't want to escalate too much because it's in the middle of two conflicts. It has no idea how to end. It's doing, very badly right now, honestly, in Gaza and in Lebanon. So Iran knows that, Israel can cause them a lot of harm, but then they're just trading missiles with, the entire Middle East. So they're gambling on the fact that Israel is going to want to contain that. But then, of course, Israel doesn't want to look like a wuss in the Middle East. And everyone in Israel now is waiting for the response. If you dare to say they shouldn't respond, people get very angry at you. So they're just going to have to respond. Then is Iran going to have to respond? You see, so you have to, there's a psychological and political need to keep responding, but no one actually wants it to escalate.
The interesting thing here, the big story, which of course and those people who don't follow Shaiel on Twitter need to follow him. But certainly I get thankful to get a lot of your feed. The Saudis and the Jordanians stepping up to play here. Though it didn't shock me. Look, there's so much ignorance on this. I mean, Jordan's been low-key a major strategic partner with Israel for 30 years. The Saudis were working toward normalization before October 7th. It turns out many of them are saying Hamas did this to thwart that. You and I have had that conversation. But pretty big deal to have these big countries that actually took the side of Israel, right, in a mini conflagration like this, right? Talk about that, because I don't think that can be understated.
Yeah. There's an absolutely historical element here. So Israel and many Arab countries have been working in a semi-secret, clandestine way together for many, many years. You mentioned that Jordan has been a partner for a long time. That partnership was formed around 1970 when Israel helped Jordan get rid of the PLO in Black September.
Well, they were trying to overthrow the Jordanian monarchy, weren't they? Weren't with Palestinians?
That's right.
Yeah, right.
And kill the king. And of course, he didn't appreciate that. So Israel and the United States, Israel and the United States, I won't go into all the details, but Israel and the United States together saved his ass. And then that changed a lot of things. In 1973, King Hussein tried to warn Israel about the invasion. He already saw himself as a partner. So that's not new, that there's a lot of cooperation under the surface. But what's new here and historical and quite incredible is that Jordan actually launched its Air Force publicly to shoot down drones flying at Israel, including the king's daughter, who, according to reports, probably exaggerated, but still, why are they saying that? Shot down 6 drones. They took all these glorious pictures of her, coming out of the plane, looking all like a heroine.
I mean, she was a beautiful woman. I mean, picture was like drop dead. When I first saw it, it was almost like somebody like took a photo shoot, but obviously they helped. I love it,
Yeah, and they're doing it publicly, and that there's no history of that. There's been such a history of Arab countries helping Israel secretly, but actually doing it publicly is really something in the middle of this war.
Yeah, and I want to tap onto this, and obviously I love this because you and I can have. You've been on, and our freewheeling ways here. I want to make sure we touch these points. Even though America and Israel saved Jordan's ass, and Jordan has had, like you said, since 1970, this relationship, and certainly codified into a basic kind of peace agreement in 94. Even though Iran, right, is there, I guess, the religious schisms make the Shiites an undesirable group and a power threat, it's still not. They don't like the Palestinians, but they didn't necessarily have to help Israel against Iran, even though Iran backs these terrorist outfits. Or is that why they did it? I mean, in other words, it's amazing. I'm loving this, but I love scrambling the view that if Israel doesn't have peace with the Palestinians, everything goes to shit, because that's proven not to be true. It's a problem for Israel, but it hasn't created but it hasn't been there's a lot of peace going on in the region. I'm not excusing every single thing. I'm just saying, I think there's a lot of onus on the Palestinians still that they don't take responsibility for, as you know. But so Jordan's aim with this was to sort of thwart Iran, right? Because of who they back. Is that what this was? Or do they hate Hezbollah? What's the story here?
There's a lot of elements here that aren't being covered by the Western media, even though they're very important.
Yes,
so there's been so when this war was launched by Hamas, the plan that Hamas and Iran had, right? And don't let anyone tell you that Iran wasn't involved in planning October 7th.
Yes. I mean, listen, we know who's sponsoring terrorism. That's another lie. We'll get back to that in a second, but go ahead.
Yes. So part of the plan for both Sinwar and for the IRGC was that they want to inflame the West Bank and turn the West Bank into another Gaza, so that Israel is busy on every single front. Correct. And that's been a nightmare scenario for Israel. Now, how do you do that? You have to bring in heavy-duty weapons into the West Bank. And the only way to get heavy-duty weapons to the West Bank, there's no airport there that Israel allows planes into, is through the Jordan River. And that involves smuggling it through Jordan. Now, Jordan has a very bad experience with being used as a proxy setup land for terrorist attacks. That's what led in 1970 to what happened. At that time, Israel considered Jordan to be a Fatah, PLO-owned country where attacks were coming into it from, and that led to a 67 war for their involvement in 67 war, and it led to 1970 Black September. So they tried to prevent that. So the Jordanian military has been fighting arms smugglers, has been killing IRGC agents, has been confiscating arms coming into Jordan, and in order to further this plan, and I don't know all the details of this, but in order to further this plan, Iran has definitely tried to destabilize Jordan and has definitely tried to destabilize the Hashemite kingdom and the king, just like the Palestinians did in 1970. So he's stood in the way of this Iranian plan for a Shiite crescent, uniting the West Bank to Syria, to Iraq, to Iran, the way they already have with Lebanon. So Jordan sees this as an existential battle, and they know that without U.S. support and without Israeli support, they can't exist in the current Middle East. The biggest victims of the United States withdrawing or Israel losing power would probably be the Hashemite kingdom, and they haven't survived this long by being stupid.
No. And they're allies for sure, and which is wonderful to see, because of course they were, ardent foes like Egypt once was of Israel. And they were, as they mentioned, they attacked and were.
They've never been as ardent foes as the other Arab states. Even in 1948, it appears the documents that we've seen since then that Jordan never really intended to destroy Israel. Their main goal in invading in 1948 was to stop the Egyptians and the Syrians from taking over.
Yes. Right.
They hate Palestinian nationalism and always have and see that as the main enemy. And that's the core of the cooperation between Israel and Jordan. Still is, always has been.
Well, I happen to agree with them. That is an enemy. To your knowledge, are Bibi Netanyahu and the King of Jordan, I would say friends? Are they frenemies? Are they, what do they talk? What do they do?
They really deeply dislike each other. The reason being that Netanyahu is a serious problem for Middle Eastern leaders who rely on cooperation with Israel because they need to cooperate with Israel, but Netanyahu makes it incredibly costly by constantly causing diplomatic incidents and problems that he doesn't have to.
Right.
And using them for political gain. It's the same problem that Joe Biden has with Netanyahu, Hussein and others have with Netanyahu. And he's often conducted Mossad operations and things like that without consulting the Jordanians, and that's been a problem for a long time between Netanyahu, starting in his first term back in the 90s until now. He's never really respected Jordanian sovereignty. He's never really respected Jordanian interests, and they really resent that, the Jordanians, because they really need cooperation with Israel.
Now, was that a deviation from past prime ministers? Were the rest of them a little more amenable to Jordan?
Well,
or is Bibi? Is Bibi uniquely awful in this, or were the rest of them bad faith actors too?
Bibi's uniquely awful. Yeah, I mean, I have some hesitancy saying that because only in '94 did you have peace, and before that was a very different situation. Cooperating with them was harder, and most of the time since the peace agreement, Netanyahu's been prime minister. We've had a few years here and there with someone else.
Well, '94 he wasn't it still Rabin?
It was still Rabin, but '96 it was Netanyahu. But certainly someone like Ariel Sharon is much better at handling handling Middle Eastern diplomacy than Netanyahu is.
That's interesting because Sharon was long regarded as the great right-wing troublemaker, right? But
Sharon was a little bit like an Israeli Assad. He was he would have been a dictator if it wasn't Israel. He was a strong man. If he told you something, you could rely on him on the international scene that he would do it. And if you messed with him, you could rely on him that he would kill you. And the Middle Easterners respected that. He's of the same cloth. Some of the Israeli leaders were like that.
So I was going to say, and this brings me in my next question about Iran. I mean, the one thing in the whole region, Shiite, Sunni, Israeli, and I think it's very important for Americans, or mainly Americans, to listen to this, is strength is the coin of the realm. The idea of a non-response is such again, we're not living in the real world. Okay. You're living in some rational, abstract, academic game theory is not relevant. Okay, it's a wonderful theory, but not when you got to make split tough decisions as a leader in a very precarious region. If Israel attacks, given we know that Bibi doesn't like taking any shit, and that part of him I like. I mean, are these going to be? I mean, we don't know, but would you suspect that they're going to be attacks on military installations? Are they going to? I mean, he's not going to escalate it into. There's nothing in it for Israel to have a full scale ground war. So, what's your take? I'm just reacting to your face, which is disconcerting. Not because I don't like your face. I don't like the look on your face.
Yeah, no, I saw my own look and I knew exactly what you were reacting to.
Yeah.
Okay, so on the one hand, Israel has no interest at all in escalating with Iran right now, in my opinion, but that's on the strategic level. On the political level, there are two things that Netanyahu can gain. Attacking Iran right now very forcefully would be popular. Most Israelis would be very happy to see it. It would earn Netanyahu some popularity.
Isn't he right? Isn't he right?
To attack?
Yeah, isn't Israel right to not to have a ground war, but to respond? Isn't
yeah, of course. But my point is, the stronger the response, the more popular it will be, at least with his base. Right?
And he's embattled,
he's embattled, exactly. I love that word, yeah. And he also has an interest, and he will never say so, but we all suspect in Israel to prolong the war as much as possible so that he can try to ride out this entire term. And nothing will make this war go further and longer than starting some kind of tit for tat with Iran, which Israel can't finish. There's no way it can finish. It will have terrible costs, but yeah. So if managed correctly, for Netanyahu's perspective, he could get some political benefits from escalation. Not a ground war. A ground war is logistically impossible. Now, very few countries can invade countries they're not contiguous with, and Israel's not one of those.
That's right.
Yeah, the U.S. can do that. Very few other countries can. But they certainly can bomb each other for years if they wanted to. And my concern is that Netanyahu might think I can keep this under control for political benefit, and then he can't. That's why I'm not sanguine about this. I'm concerned.
I always talk, and believe it or not, more on Instagram than Twitter. I have a few followers who are Persian, whose families, one of them fled Iran for India. They were Zoroastrians, actually, which was the original religion, or not the original, but an original religion for what was Persia. And the support for my posts about Israel from Iranian people is incredibly Zionistic. It's a wonderful thing. It's a really far cry from the Palestinian or the global left, which hates Israel. I mean, these folks really are rooting to take them out, get rid of the regime. My question to you is, what do we have an accurate assessment in your view of what Khamenei and the Islamic mullahs are like right now? I mean, would they be able to fall? Are they in danger of losing power? I'd love to talk a little bit, to the extent you know that. Can we talk about the Iranian, they're the great Satan, if you ask me. Let's call them that.
I think the Kremlin's the great Satan right now, if you want to use their terminology. I think the Kremlin is where
by the way, not the Iranian people. I'm talking about the mullahs. I'm not talking about
Yes. I know. Okay, so as far as they're falling, look, I'm not an expert on Iranian politics. That won't stop me from speculating, though, because I have a strong feeling, based on the research that I've done, the people that I've talked to, and past experience, that we are suffering from delusions that the Iranian regime is on the verge of falling. I don't think that that's the case. I think that the Iranian regime has serious problems with legitimacy, but every dictatorship ever has serious problems with legitimacy. One of the reasons we think that they're on the verge of attack on the verge of collapse is because they have such a strong diaspora of people who hate the regime.
Right.
And
they make videos about it all the time. Right.
Yeah, there's I don't know how many there are, but who are against the regime, but there's hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. But most of them are abroad, and the ones in the country, they exist, but I think they're urban elites. And we already saw a case of what happens when urban elites convince people abroad that they represent the country when they don't, in the Arab Spring in Egypt. I don't know if you remember how much coverage in the Arab Spring we had of the pro-democracy movements.
I remember.
And I do remember giving a talk about the Arab Spring and saying that it's going to fail. And having an Egyptian student Egyptian student in tears tell me that I'm not understanding the depth of how the Egyptian people want democracy. And boy, did he believe it. But he represented what was a minority of the people. But the trouble is, when reporters go to Egypt or go to Iran, they talk to people who talk to foreigners who know English, who are in the cities, who are in the hotels that they're in, and they don't like the regime. But do they represent all the people? No, they don't go into the country and talk to illiterate peasants who support the regime and might take up arms for the regime. Yeah. And my point is not that the regime will never fall. No. Don't have any illusions that all you do is push it and it will collapse. It doesn't work that way. And there's this illusion that we have in the West that we're going to be greeted as liberators every second. It's not going to happen. Don't plan based on it. If you can poke holes in the regime through the CIA, Mossad, great. But Israel bombing or the U.S. bombing is only going to make people rally around the regime. Yep. It's going to make them crack down on opposition. Yep. Before the war in Ukraine, we also saw that in Russia there were all these opposition groups. That's one of the reasons he invaded Ukraine, so that he would have an excuse to crack down on them. And it worked.
That's right. Speaking of Putin, since we're talking about him as the great Satan, so obviously he holds an important partnership with Iran, as he did with Assad and Syria, or does. What's his end game here? How would you think the chessboard would look with an Israeli response to Iran? I mean, does Putin supply them with any necessary technology or anything? What do they get out of it?
Well, right now things are reversed. Instead of Russia supplying Iran with technology, Iran is supplying Russia with technology.
Yeah.
All the drones that they used against Israel are the same drones that they're using against Ukraine.
Yeah, I want people to know that the drones used against Israel were literally the drones Putin used against Ukraine. That's such an important point, which is why, again, I'm a believer in the Reagan doctrine, okay, as a Cold War kid. I'm not trying to it's not about being a partisan. We've lost our way. We have very weak leadership right now, in my opinion. I believe in peace through strength. I believe in alliances, but I believe our adversaries have to fear us. That doesn't mean I believe we go to war with everybody, but I believe they have to fear us. And my point in saying this is there is such an important nexus between, to me, supporting Israel and supporting Ukraine. The fact that this has been engulfed and swallowed by MAGA assholes, okay, who are not doing their job in Congress. Trump is, their marionette. And that there are people in the Progressive Caucus who've not wanted to sign a discharge petition to get Israel and Ukraine aid to the floor because they're mad at Israel. This is just bad for the world. And I think you agree, right? I mean, there's an important connection to, again, for lack of a better word, democratic strongholds in regions that share our values. And that's what I believe we ought to be aligned with.
Yeah, that's absolutely the most important issue of our time, I think, is the fight for the preservation of democracy. And the front lines in the fight for preservation of democracy are in Israel and Ukraine. And I am just as gung-ho and passionate about Ukraine as I am about Israel. I just talk about it less because I'm not less of an expert, right?
Of course.
I'm sure I know stuff.
Yes, of course. But listen, it doesn't mean you can't. But, you're thematically in the same lane, ideologically.
Yes. Right. I obsessively follow the war in Ukraine because I think that it's very, very important. And one of the main reasons Russia is so involved in undermining Israel right now is because of the war in Ukraine. They view it as linked. Iran and Russia are clearly one of the things that I think Russia's trading for all the help it's getting from Iran is help in the information warfare world. People like Jackson Hinkle and others who are the hatchet men on social media of the Kremlin never talked about Israel before October 7th. And since they've been talking about nothing else. I don't even know all the names of that lady who pretends to be a doctor in Denmark.
Putin propaganda. Putin and his propagandists have been important to Putin, to the Russian Federation, and being dispatched to undermine Israel because they're helping to do Putin's dirty work. Jackson Hinkle, for those people that don't know, is a odd case. He's from Southern California. He was a progressive at one time, like this super environmental. No, really, he was a lefty. He considered himself as an ideologue. And then he ended up becoming this ferocious pro-China, pro-Russia Marxist, but anti-Israel, but weirdly from the right, though he adopts he kind of uses the Leninist playbook, but he's on the right, even though he hates America. It's very complicated. There's actually, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, there's a big piece on him in the New York Times. He's a real rabble-rouser. He's 24. He's horrific. And he has a lot of followers, and he certainly is a deep antagonist to Israel, and he is certainly a lackey of Putin's as far as social media influencers go. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. He's the #1 account on Twitter last I saw with the most impressions.
Oh, and he came out for Iran too this weekend.
Oh, yeah. And
that
for
makes
Hamas.
Sense. That's good, of course.
He said he wanted to volunteer for Hamas. I remember seeing that post.
Okay. He would do very well in Iran. They'd love him, an All-American boy from San Clemente. He should go over there and see if he was welcome. Although apparently the New York Times reported he was invited to state dinners for the Russian Federation and China. I don't know who was at them when he went over there as a kind of propagandist. That's what they reported.
And why is Tucker Carlson all of a sudden making videos about how Israel's treating Christians in a place, by the way, where Israel isn't even present, in Bethlehem?
Isn't it? No, it's a Palestinian thing, right? And also the number of Christians has only grown, right? And not
in Israel, yes. In the Palestinian territories, not so much.
No. In Israel, meaning not in a Muslim-run area. There's considerably less of a place. I mean, it wasn't always Palestinian Bethlehem. It was not before. When did it become Palestinian? Was it 50 years? How long ago was that?
Well, the question of when Palestinians became Palestinians is a philosophical, historiographical one. I would say there've been a Palestinian people for about 100 years, and Bethlehem has been Palestinian for about 100 years.
Right, but that's just the Roman name to wipe out Jewish erasure. It's Philistine.
Absolutely.
Philistine.
Absolutely, but
people. I mean, that was a whole other thing. They were meant to agree.
Identities are invented. Every identity is invented. If you go back far enough, if you listen to my history podcast, I talk about how Jewish identity was invented. It was just a long time ago, and then Palestinian identity was invented very recently. It's all imagined communities. There's no reality to identity. It's something that's constructed. So the Palestinians, we've seen them be constructed. Doesn't make it not real. As you can see, they're willing to fight and die for their identity.
It's real to them. It's real to them. Yeah. So let's talk about the Saudis. So before October 7th, there was this, it looked like the Biden administration was working toward some form of normalization, which seemed to cease for the last 6 months. But now the Saudis have openly said they helped Israel. That was a big fucking deal that they came out and said it, What's their end game? Is that they just want to get back in business here, and they're fine with this now, even if Bibi goes to Rafah?
Well, I don't think the Saudis care at all about Rafah itself. They care if the pictures there look bad for them. But I'm not sure the Saudi Arabia is that worried about Rafah. What they are worried about is that if they normalize with Israel, they have something they can wave to say to Muslims, we took care of the Palestinians too. This is an old game that Sadat played back in '79 when Israel signed the peace deal with the Egyptians. The main problem wasn't Sinai. Israel wanted out of Sinai.
Right. That wasn't such a big give. They were like, take it. Right.
Yeah, it wasn't a big deal. There were some settlements there, but aside from Begin himself, no one else cared. But the West Bank, they demanded that Israel give autonomy to the West Bank, which Begin did not want. And Israel ended up making a lot of concessions there in order to get the peace with Egypt. A lot more than you would expect, but it didn't come to anything. So Saudi Arabia is trying to do the same thing. They want to be able to say, we didn't just do this for us, we did this for the Palestinians. Because in Arab society, the idea of pan-Arabism, we're all Arabs and we're all brothers and we all work for each other, is still very important. Not as important as it was in the 60s, but very important.
Well, and Iranians are Persians, not Arabs. Iranians are not pan-Arab, they're not Arab. So a lot of people.
Well, that's always what the Persians say. They say, look at us, we're doing more for the Palestinians than the Arabs. The Arabs are selling themselves their own brothers out, like Saudi Arabia.
In this era, the Iranian government is doing plenty for the Palestinians. That's nurturing their terrorist nightmare. So,
right, but that has currency with certain Muslims.
Yes.
It's all bullshit. They're doing it for their own purposes. They're willing to fight for Palestine till the last Palestinian, and they're willing to fight for Lebanon to the last southern Lebanese Shiite. They don't want to sacrifice their own people. That's why they've never attacked Israel directly before. I'm not sure it was such a good idea. Yeah, but my point is they can say to the Saudis, and that's what the Saudis are worried about. You guys are traitors. You're betraying the Palestinians. We're the ones really fighting for the Palestinians. You think you deserve to have Mecca when you're selling out the Palestinians, when you're the bitches of the Americans and the Israelis? That's what they say about the Saudis. So what the Saudis want is to be able to come and say, we got this for the Palestinians. And if Israel wants normalization with them, they're going to have to produce it. Because I've talked to plenty of Saudis, and a lot of them want to work with Israel, but they all say, we need something to show to the Muslim world. And Netanyahu does not want to show it because his cabinet will rebel against him. So that's why it hasn't happened.
Right. How are you feeling about, I know we're switching over to Israel and Gaza. Obviously, by all it looks as if Israel will both respond to Iran in some way. They will also go into Rafah, it seems, so there seems to be a pause. I don't know what's going on there exactly. I mean, I've heard what's going on. Are you at all concerned that the Biden administration, okay, but let me preface by saying this. Everything is not, but Trump is horrible. I know he's horrible. I want to talk about the Biden administration. I just want to preface that. I'm not trying to muzzle you, but I don't want DNC talking points. Are you at all concerned? I know you don't give them anyway. I'm giving you a hard time, but I'm just saying, I don't want to get, well, Trump is a menace. Yeah, we know, but he's not there now and he may not be there. So get in. So are you at all concerned that there's been a lot of mixed messaging now? There's been sort of this politically, Democrats are worried about Michigan. They're worried about the youth vote. So they're doing a little bit of this. I'm looking over here. I'm looking over there. We're going to send you arms shipments, but then some congressmen are saying, don't do that. The aid workers. I mean, God bless these people. They went to a war zone. Aid workers get killed. I don't mean to be callous. I mean, this is insane that Jose Andres is governing international policy. I really don't care what he has to say, quite frankly. I mourn for the dead, but I really don't. What is Biden just seems to have taken his foot off the pedal ever so slightly on this.
No, I really disagree with the foot off the pedal. I agree with the mixed messaging. So I'll start with the mixed messaging. Biden is under incredible pressure. One of the things that people miss when they keep talking just about Biden is how much public opinion in the United States has changed. If you look at the polls, the amount of people who support the Israeli war effort is very low right now. There's more people right now who don't than do. And that's especially true among Democrats. So Democrat elected officials are increasingly trying to get a ceasefire in order to please their constituents, win their own elections, that sort of thing. And of course, Biden has to pay attention to that. On the other hand, he doesn't want to alienate Jewish voters. But and on the third hand, he is very focused on the actual diplomatic issues at hand. How much he's looking at the elections is being vastly overstated, I think, because I don't think the Biden campaign actually thinks this is the issue that will make or break the elections. They think it's important, but they think that abortion, inflation, that those sorts of things are going to make. So I think
the border.
Yeah. So. Yeah, so he's trying to address all these different things. He's trying to address Israel, Iran, Hamas, pro-Hamas demonstrators, moderate legislators with doubts, the voters in the suburbs who are the swing voters. He's trying to address a lot of constituencies, and that's why his messaging is a mess. But the policy is actually not a mess. The policy has been very clear to try to get Israel to win with the lowest amount of casualties and bring in a moderate Palestinian reformed government to allow Israel to normalize with Saudi Arabia. That way he can protect Israeli interests, bring the war to an end, and shut out Iran all in time for the elections. That's his policy. You can argue whether it's a good one or not. I'm not sure that he really has an alternative to that policy. Like, I can't really think of anything better that he could be doing.
Well, I'm not against that. I'm not necessarily, I mean, you and I talked about this in the last episode. Sure. Ideally, there's a Palestinian version of Sadat that makes a deal. I mean, that would, yes, you have to deal with settlements, as you and I talked about. I guess a sort of disarmed West Bank and a Gaza that's run, I guess, by some version of a PA or something like that. Obviously, not a Hamas-led government; they have to be destroyed. And then obviously this, the deal with the Saudis as well. I just don't know if it can happen before November for a number of reasons. But I also feel that isn't Israel able to make a deal with the Saudis regardless of the existence of a Palestinian state? Because they were working toward that before October 7th. Or no? I mean, aren't they going to try to...
No, the Saudis are just not going to agree. There's no reason for them to agree. The Saudis are already enjoying a lot of the benefits of working with the U.S. and Israel without the major albatross of looking like they're betraying the Palestinians. If they're the ones
they want that for their own. Yeah, sorry, they want the Palestinian card to play themselves against everybody else.
Of course, yeah, they want to play that against the Iranians. They want to play that against their own. Yeah. Religious nut jobs in the country who don't like the reforms that they're doing. They also have their internal politics. So there's a lot of reasons that they need that. And if Israel doesn't give it to them, and Israel won't give it to them under this government, there can't be normalization. So you're right that in that sense, the Biden policy is not ideal. But he's playing a bad hand. The trouble is he wants to support Israel. He wants Israel to win, but he doesn't trust the Israeli government to do the right thing. And he's 100% correct. And that makes it very difficult. If you embrace Israel too much, they'll just do what they want. If you alienate Israel too much, then Israel will just do what they want. Henry Kissinger said the same thing when he dealt with Israel. If you give them weapons, they use it in ways that you don't want them to use. And if you don't give them weapons, they say, well, they're not giving it to us anyway, so we don't care what they think, and then they attack. So, whatever you do with Israel doesn't really work. And that's something that Biden really has an issue with. Of course, he has very less influence on Iran and Hamas. Yeah. So there's this illusion that American voters have. A lot of it's for political reasons, that the president determines everything, but the president's working with a very weak hand and doing his best. Yeah, but the messaging is terrible. I don't know if we can make it better.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. What is your take on if Israel goes into Rafah? Will that, because you and I have agreed on this, so we're going to a lot of things, but this we agree on. Hamas has to be eliminated. Is going into Rafah, and I'm for it. I'm very pro-Israel in this regard. I mean, I don't see how you don't, because we haven't finished the job, despite it all. So if we don't go in there, you still have a Hamas-led government, and that's not going to change much. Maybe it cools down for a bit, but it's this weird. The fire's still burning. We contained it, but there's still a flaming ember in the kitchen or something. I don't like that policy. I mean, we got to be realistic, is what I'm trying to say. If Israel goes into Gaza, could they eliminate Hamas? I know there's going to be casualties and damage. Can they actually root these guys out?
The answer is yes. It's more of a question of will they.
Into Rafah.
Yeah. Right. So Rafah on its own will no longer do anything. So I was a vocal advocate for going to Rafah, before it was cool for a very long time. And then what happened is it became a symbol of, if we go into Rafah, the war will end. And that was never 100% true, and it's completely untrue now. And there's two reasons for that. I still support going in, but I'll tell you what the problems are.
Sure.
Israel's withdrawn from Khan Yunis, which is a bigger city than Rafah.
Right.
And now Hamas and the people who live there are going back to Khan Yunis. So you have to go to Khan Yunis too. So basically the South now is bereft of the IDF. The IDF have to go and take it over again. The reason the IDF left and hasn't finished the job isn't because the IDF doesn't want to or can't. It's because the orders it's been given from the government are not to control the Palestinian population and not to bring in a replacement government. Right. So as it stands right now, if the IDF just waltzed into Rafah, took over Rafah, they'd kill some Hamas people, blow shit up, then they would be sitting ducks for Hamas with no government in there set up by Israel to replace. And then eventually they would leave. Because what you have to do is you have to go in, take over everything, control the population, bring in a new government, and reform infrastructure and bureaucracy. And that is a painful, expensive job that will expose the IDF to a lot of risks and a lot of deaths in order to repair Palestinian society, something which most Israelis have absolutely no interest in. And that's only if Israel agrees to all these terms from the international community, which the Israeli government currently isn't willing to do. So the problem here isn't military. The problem here is political. Israel has to agree to bring in a government to replace Hamas, even if it's its own government, which it doesn't want to do, but it has a military government, a foreign government, the PA, whatever. If it doesn't do that, Hamas is de facto the government. Going into Rafah to kill some people and then leaving will have some benefits. Maybe even some hostages will be freed, but it won't end the war.
Do you think the hostages are dead?
Well, unfortunately, I don't know if you saw the latest news, but Hamas have come back with their answer to the offer.
Hostages. They can give 20.
They said 20, and they said that they don't have more than 20 in the humanitarian category. So the Hamas said that there's about 70 alive, and that was like a month and a half ago. And now they said we don't have 40 humanitarian, and Israeli intelligence thought maybe they have 30 something. Now they're saying they have 20. The trouble is, so that's what they're saying. The trouble is they lie, and they have reason. Yeah, they have reasons to lie about the number of hostages that are alive. They like to hurt the families of the hostages. They've called them up in the middle of the night from the phones of their loved ones to haunt them and laugh at them. They enjoy their pain. That's one thing. They also want to draw out the negotiations as much as possible because they think that things are going their way. So saying, I don't have these hostages, I need to find them, or I don't have enough hostages for your deal, that makes the terms better and it wastes time. So they have reasons to lie. So I don't really have an answer. No. I know that at this point, probably about half are dead, unfortunately. I can't tell you
half of 240, right, of the original amount.
No, half of the remaining, because we got a lot of
136 or whatever that is.
Yeah. Right. So about 70 to 80 of those are dead. That seems pretty certain. Yeah. As for how much lower than that, chances are it's a little bit lower than that too. How much lower than that? That I don't know, because I don't trust Hamas at all. A lot of people are taking what they're saying as gospel regarding the number of hostages. Oh, they're all dead. I don't think so. I think that it's important to them to keep some. They want to end the war, and they know that to end the war, they'll need to give Israel some hostages. So there's a bunch of them alive. I just can't tell you how many.
Right. So, sort of at the end of our conversation here, do you think, for the moment, because it seems like seeing the Jewish star on the Eiffel Tower and European government, even the EU coming out, all these people saying what Iran did is horrible and we stand with Israel. Is this a moment of reprieve for Israel in the world opinion? In the world of world opinion, is there almost like a slight movement towards them because they were attacked by Iran?
More than anything else, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity that Israel should take advantage of. Yeah, it's there's goodwill. There's goodwill. So first thing, let's look at the importance of this moment from a wider perspective for a second before we talk about the specifics. Okay. There is this disease in the way Israel looks at the world in foreign policy, and disease is the only word for it, of thinking the entire world is anti-Semitic and is out to get us. In Hebrew, we say ha'olam negdenu, the world is against us. It's true to some extent. It's nowhere near as true as we think it is, right? What we do matters. We have friends. We have supporters. It's not that simple. We need to, when we have goodwill, that's something to work with. It doesn't mean you're appeasing. It doesn't mean you're surrendering. It means it's a diplomatic tool to be used to achieve shit, okay? And that's something that a lot of Israelis don't really understand. And this is a moment of goodwill. If we bomb Iran really harshly, we will waive that goodwill. I think that what Israel needs to do is to use this goodwill in order to get approval to go back into Rafah and Khan Yunis. Just saying Rafah anymore is pointless.
Right.
That's kind of what Netanyahu wants. Just say Rafah, go in, and still not over. Yeah. And to also garner more goodwill by agreeing to a day after government that the allies that just protected Israel from Iranian missiles and drones want, to give them what they want, because what they want is what's good for Israel too. And we can pretend it's a concession when it's not. We're doing it to save our own asses. And those things together will garner the goodwill that Israel needs to finish off Hamas. There'll still be protests or whatever, but the governments will give us more slack, especially Biden, the UK, and France will give us more slack, because we'll work on this with them. And it's a tool to be used. If Israel ignores them, does whatever it wants in Gaza, bombs Iran, gets our allies involved in a regional war they don't want any part in, raises the price of oil, et cetera, that goodwill will be gone tomorrow. It's a tool. Either Israel will use it or won't. Knowing the Netanyahu government, they won't, but they can.
Indeed. Not on that note, Shaiel Ben-Ephraim, you are an indispensable friend of the show. I know you'll be back because this crisis never ends, but it's great to have somebody, as always, with your perspective, who's Israeli, who's American, who understands geopolitics, who's an academic, and whose podcast is a must listen. Tell everybody about your podcast, where to find it, and where to find you on Twitter.
Yeah, so on Twitter, look for me in academic_LA. On YouTube, look for me under Shaiel Ben-Ephraim Explains Israel. And I have a history podcast too. It's been running for a long time. History of the Land of Israel podcast. Look for it on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome.
And I have a book coming out later this year.
Oh, that's right. We're going to have you on to talk about that. I forgot about it. All right. But we'll probably have you on before then. Shaiel, as always, thank you for joining us. Shalom.
Shalom.
Yes. And have a wonderful rest of the day, folks. As
You too.
always, stay dirty, stay moderate, stay safe.
Viva democracy.
Viva democracy.